It was April 2009. A 47-year-old Scottish woman stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage wearing a beige dress, mismatched shoes, and a nervous smile. The audience snickered. The judges exchanged raised eyebrows. No one expected much. After all, this was a show built on spectacle. Susan Boyle didn't look like someone meant for fame. But then she sang. I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables echoed through the theater, and silence fell. That first note shifted everything. Disbelief turned into awe, laughter into tears. By the end of the performance, the crowd was on their feet, screaming. Even Simon Cowell looked stunned. Amanda Holden called it the biggest wake-up call in television history. Within days, the audition went viral. It was the moment of the year, shared, tweeted, and rewatched over 100 million times. A-list celebrities like Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher rushed to support her. Susan, who had never even performed publicly before that night, was suddenly a global icon. But here's what most people missed. She didn't win. Despite her jaw-dropping talent and international fan base, Susan came in second, losing to a dance troupe called Diversity. And yet, that didn't matter. The world had already chosen its champion. Susan Boyle had become the voice of the underdog, proof that raw talent could defy expectations, that beauty could come in unexpected forms, and that age was never a limit to chasing a dream. But behind that miracle moment was a woman who'd endured a lifetime of heartbreak to even make it to that stage. And what came next would nearly destroy her. Before she became a viral sensation, Susan Boyle lived a life most would overlook. She was born on April 1st, 1961, the youngest of 10 children in a small Scottish town called Blackburn, West Lothian. Her father was a miner, her mother a shorthand typist. Their home was modest, a 4-bedroom council house filled with noise, struggle, and little privacy. But from the moment she was born, Susan's path was already marked by hardship. Her birth had complications. Doctors later said she was briefly deprived of oxygen, leading to a misdiagnosis of brain damage. That label followed her like a shadow. She was slower to learn, awkward in social settings, and constantly misunderstood. Teachers didn't help. They beat her with belts for falling behind. Her classmates were even crueler. They called her Susie Simple. They laughed when she couldn't keep up. She never fit in. At home, things weren't much better. Her parents, well-meaning but overwhelmed, didn't understand her struggles. She had undiagnosed epilepsy and would suffer seizures in school. Instead of receiving support, she'd wake up on the floor surrounded by mockery. The school system didn't care. Her peers didn't care. Even her father sometimes dismissed her need for help, calling her too touchy. Music was her only escape. She joined her local church choir, sang at community events, and poured her emotions into every note. But she never believed she could turn that passion into a career. She didn't see herself as talented. After all, the world around her never did. She bounced between short-term jobs, mostly unpaid government training programs. A trainee cook job lasted 6 months. Most others ended sooner. She didn't have qualifications. She didn't have confidence. All she had was her voice. And when her beloved mother passed away in 2007, Susan lost the one person who truly believed in her. That grief became the final push. She remembered how her mother had begged her to audition for Britain's Got Talent. So, 1 year later, broken-hearted and utterly alone, Susan walked onto that stage, armed with nothing but the dream her mother left behind. She had no idea what was coming next. In less than a week, Susan Boyle went from complete anonymity to international stardom. Her audition clip dominated YouTube, racking up over 100 million views. People who had laughed at her now celebrated her. The world couldn't get enough. And Susan? She was thrown into the deep end. Suddenly, the woman who had spent most of her life in a quiet Scottish town was traveling across the globe. She was on talk shows, magazine covers, radio interviews. Her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream, released in November 2009, shattered records. It sold more than 2 million copies in its first week, making it the fastest-selling debut album by a female artist in history. To the world, it looked like Susan was living the dream. But inside, she was unraveling. Fame came with a price she wasn't prepared to pay. The rigorous press tours, the lights, the expectations, the endless scrutiny of her looks, her voice, her behavior, and worst of all, the critics who, despite everything, still treated her like a punchline. The pressure became unbearable. Just days after the Britain's Got Talent finale, Susan was hospitalized due to extreme exhaustion. Rumors swirled. Some said she had lashed out backstage, thrown water at staff, and shouted that she hated the show. That night, the police were called to her hotel. What the public didn't see was that Susan was in the middle of a full mental breakdown. She had spent decades being told she wasn't enough. Now, the entire world wanted a piece of her, and it was all happening too fast. The fame she had dreamed of her entire life was also destroying her. UK regulators briefly considered launching an inquiry into the show for neglecting her mental health, but in the end, nothing came of it. Susan returned to the stage, but everything had changed. She had learned the hard way that in the entertainment industry, talent isn't enough. You need armor, you need handlers, you need protection. And Susan had none of that. Still, she pushed on. For her fans, for the dream, for her mother. But while the cameras kept rolling, something inside Susan had already begun to crack. For most of her life, Susan Boyle believed something was wrong with her. She'd been told since childhood that she had brain damage, something that supposedly happened at birth. It explained why school was so hard, why she couldn't keep up, why people laughed and called her simple. She accepted it quietly. What else could she do? But in 2012, everything changed. After years of unexplained frustration, confusion, and emotional setbacks, Susan was finally evaluated by specialists. The result? She had never been brain damaged at all. She had Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism spectrum disorder, and it changed everything. For Susan, the news was both devastating and freeing. "I always knew it wasn't right," she said. "Being told you were brain damaged was so cruel. I was just different. I always felt I had something to offer, but I didn't know what." The diagnosis was a revelation. It explained the sensory overload, the social anxiety, the obsessive focus on music, and the emotional shutdowns. For the first time, Susan understood herself, but that wasn't all. She also had epilepsy. Throughout her childhood, she'd experienced seizures, fainting at school, waking up to kids laughing and calling her names. Teachers didn't know how to help. Her parents were overwhelmed. So like everything else in her life, Susan suffered silently. These weren't just medical terms, they were keys to her identity. Suddenly, decades of trauma, confusion, and shame made sense. But there was also anger. Anger at the system that failed her. At the adults who beat her instead of helping her. At the years she lost believing she was broken. Still, Susan did what she had always done. She kept going. She used her platform to raise awareness for autism. She spoke candidly about what it meant to be neurodivergent in a world that doesn't understand. "Maybe now," she said, "people will treat me with more compassion." The girl once labeled damaged had proven herself not only talented, but resilient. But while the truth brought peace, it also revealed just how much she had endured alone. Fame brought Susan Boyle millions of fans, global recognition, and record-breaking success. But it also brought something far more dangerous: money. And with that, money came chaos. Back in her childhood council house, Susan had lived with simplicity, no luxury, no spotlight, no expectations. After her rise to fame, everything changed. She was now worth over $45 million. and suddenly everyone around her seemed to want a piece of it, including her family. At first, Susan tried to stay grounded. Despite earning millions, she refused to leave her modest home. She still shopped at local stores, still rode public transport, still lived with her beloved cat, Pebbles. But her world was no longer quiet. It started with her brother, Jerry. In 2013, Susan gave him a staggering $75,000 to help save his struggling business. But behind the scenes, things were darker than they appeared. Susan later claimed that Jerry had threatened to take his own life if she didn't give him the money. Her siblings were outraged by her decision, accusing her of favoritism and secrecy. The feud exploded. Jerry publicly accused Susan of lying. Tabloids ran the story for weeks, portraying a messy family war playing out in the shadow of Susan's fame. The woman who once longed for love and support now found herself surrounded by distrust, resentment, and betrayal. Then came the break-in. After purchasing a new home in 2010, one she hoped would bring peace, Susan was forced to abandon it. A group of local troublemakers began harassing her, throwing rocks at the windows, trying to force their way in, and even launching firecrackers at the property. It became too dangerous. She gave the house to her niece and returned to the only place she ever felt safe, her childhood home. She didn't complain. She never lashed out publicly. But behind closed doors, the toll was clear. Things only got worse when her sister Bridie, her closest confidant and emotional anchor, died of cancer in 2015. Bridie had been Susan's protector during the media storms, her cheerleader when critics mocked her, and her grounding force when fame threatened to swallow her whole. Her death shattered Susan. The grief was so intense, Susan had to cancel appearances and step away from the spotlight once again. And yet somehow, she carried on, quietly, humbly, alone. Despite everything, family betrayal, public feuds, media attacks, Susan never fought back. Because for her, the goal was never fame. It was peace. Throughout her rise to stardom, one phrase followed Susan Boyle everywhere. Never been married, never been kissed. It wasn't just a quote, it became her identity, a symbol of innocence, loneliness, and missed chances. But that simple line masked something deeper. Susan had grown up in a deeply traditional household. Romance wasn't a priority. Her focus was on survival, on caring for her ailing mother, avoiding bullies, and battling the trauma of misdiagnosed disorders. While other girls her age were dating, Susan was quietly watching life pass her by from the sidelines. And when fame arrived, it didn't make things easier. Despite being one of the most recognized women in the world, Susan remained guarded. She once joked on national television, "Knowing my luck, I'd go on a date and end up with my limbs in a Blackburn bin." It was said in jest, but the fear was real. Trust was hard to come by. But then, something changed. In 2014, rumors surfaced that Susan had a boyfriend, something fans never expected. He was an American doctor, older, kind, and reportedly a private man who understood her quiet nature. The relationship was never confirmed in full, but Susan admitted to chatting with him regularly and that he made her laugh. Some insiders claim he even traveled with her on special occasions, including her birthday. Still, Susan refused to go public. She never shared his name, never posted photos. She said she was happy, but that marriage was off the table. To this day, the identity of the American beau remains a mystery, even to the most invasive tabloids. But one thing is clear. While Susan may have found companionship later in life, she still carries one major regret: not having children. In rare interviews, she's admitted that not becoming a mother is one of the only things she truly wishes had been different. "There's a part of me that feels empty," she said once, "but maybe that wasn't my path." Instead, she's poured her nurturing spirit into her music and into the quiet acts of kindness no one hears about: volunteering at church, visiting elderly neighbors, donating privately to causes she never promotes. Because for Susan, Love was never about headlines or red carpets. It was about loyalty, simplicity, and finding someone who could see the soul behind the voice. In April 2022, Susan Boyle disappeared from the spotlight again. No albums, no public appearances, no interviews. Fans began to worry. Then, a year later, she returned to the very stage that had made her famous, Britain's Got Talent, and delivered a revelation that sent chills through the audience. She had suffered a minor stroke. The voice that had stunned the world was nearly silenced for good. Susan described the experience as terrifying. In an Instagram post after the show, she revealed that the stroke had impacted her ability to speak and sing, skills that were the foundation of her identity. For months, she wasn't sure she'd ever sing again, but she didn't give up. With quiet determination, she threw herself into speech therapy. Day after day, she worked to retrain her voice, starting with simple phrases and gradually building the muscle memory she'd spent decades perfecting. Friends said it was like watching someone learn to walk again, and then she came back. On June 4th, 2023, Susan stepped on stage during the Britain's Got Talent finale. Dressed in a dark, elegant gown and backed by the West End cast of Les Miserables, she performed I Dreamed a Dream, the very song that made her a household name. The crowd erupted. Judges stood in awe. Many, including Susan herself, were in tears. "I thought it would be crazy to be back on stage," she admitted, "but I've done it." It wasn't just a performance, it was a victory lap. A defiant statement that she wouldn't let age, illness, or fear define her legacy. But make no mistake, the stroke had changed her. Susan now takes fewer appearances. Her public life is quieter, her body moves slower, but the fire in her voice, that haunting, emotional power that once stunned the world, it's still there. She continues to sing when she can, not for fame, not for fortune, but because it's the one thing that's always been truly hers. And in that moment on stage, under the same lights that once nearly broke her, Susan Boyle reminded the world, she's still here. While most stars chase the limelight, Susan Boyle walked away from it. Even after earning millions, setting records, and becoming one of the most viral voices in history, she chose to return to the one place that never judged her, her childhood home in Blackburn, Scotland. She still lives there today, not in a mansion, not in a gated estate, but in the same 4-bedroom council house where she grew up, where 10 siblings once shared cramped rooms, where she cared for her dying mother, and where she first sang alone in her room, dreaming of something more. Why stay? Susan says it's simple. Fame was never the goal. Peace was. She describes her life now as mundane and quiet, filled with walks around the village, visits to elderly neighbors, and singing in her local church choir. She avoids red carpets, declines most interviews, and while the world still watches her audition on YouTube, Susan lives in near anonymity just blocks away from where that clip first went viral. Behind closed doors, she still battles health issues, type 2 diabetes, epilepsy, the aftermath of her stroke. Her energy is limited, her appearances rare. But when she does step onto a stage, it's like time rewinds. That same voice, that same power still cuts through the noise. And yet, what defines Susan Boyle isn't just her voice. It's her refusal to let the world reshape her. In an industry obsessed with reinvention, Susan never tried to become someone else. She didn't trade her identity for popularity. She didn't glam up her image or chase clickbait headlines. She stayed exactly who she was, a soft-spoken woman with a staggering gift, a lifetime of pain, and a heart that never stopped believing. That's her legacy, not just the albums, not the records, but the quiet courage to be herself in a world that demanded she become something else. Susan Boyle didn't just defy expectations, she destroyed them. From being mocked on stage to becoming the voice of a generation, her story isn't a fairy tale, it's a battle cry, one that says, you can be overlooked, underestimated, even broken, and still win. Her journey wasn't just about talent, it was about endurance, about showing up when the world told her not to, about singing through heartbreak, through betrayal, through illness, and most importantly, through silence. While others chase fame, Susan Boyle returned home, not in defeat, but in peace. She found what so many celebrities lose, a sense of self. No, she never married. No, she never had children. But she gave the world something else, something even rarer: truth. So the next time you watch that famous audition, don't just see a woman surprising a crowd. See a woman surviving a lifetime, one note at a time. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't disappear. Maybe she finally found what she'd been dreaming of all along. If you found Susan Boyle's story as powerful as we did, share this video, drop a comment, and let us know. What part of her journey moved you the most? Because behind every overnight success is a lifetime you never saw coming.